We have a breaking down of the monetary order.
The U.S. national debt just passed $34 trillion.
Fed Chair Jerome Powell giving his starkest warning yet on President Trump's tariffs.
The economy up by 5.4% year on year. March industrial output.
Again, there'll be a transition cost and transition problems.
The alarms are ringing, but most people aren't listening. We're watching major pillars of the U.S. economy tremble under pressure. A record-high national debt, inflation that refuses to vanish, a dollar that's slowly losing its global dominance. Meanwhile, China is playing the long game, investing, expanding, and executing. This is the start of a massive transition, one that could change everything from global leadership to the value of your paycheck. What if this is the final warning? What happens when a world order doesn't just change, but collapses? There's a shift happening right now that most people won't fully understand until it's already too late. The U.S., once the undisputed economic superpower, is now facing a wave of challenges unlike anything we've seen in recent history. National debt is climbing at a record pace. Inflation remains stubborn, interest payments on debt are skyrocketing, and political division is choking our ability to respond with unity or vision. Meanwhile, China is accelerating. Its economy is growing faster than expected. It's deepening ties with emerging markets, expanding its influence through massive infrastructure projects, and aggressively pursuing global leadership in technology, manufacturing, and currency systems. But this isn't just about two countries. This is about a global economic order that has operated under U.S. dominance for decades, and that dominance is now being tested. Former U.S. Treasury Secretary Larry Summers recently warned that we're witnessing the slow erosion of dollar supremacy. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, says this moment is eerily similar to the tipping points that ended previous empires, from the Dutch to the British. He points to a clear pattern: high debt, internal conflict, inflation, declining productivity, and rising external competition. Sound familiar? There's also growing concern about what's being called the 2025 problem, the year many economists predict could mark a deeper economic slowdown or a market correction, triggered by unsustainable debt levels and shrinking global trust in U.S. financial leadership. At home, political polarization is making it harder to pass meaningful economic reforms. Global confidence in the dollar is softening, and the U.S. is increasingly seen as reactive rather than strategic. This moment is dangerous not because of one big event, but because of the slow buildup of vulnerabilities. Domestically, the U.S. is battling partisan chaos, gridlocked leadership, and a population more divided than ever. Internationally, rivals are rising, strategic, patient, and often overlooked by Western media. We're not just watching market trends or short-term cycles. This is something bigger. This is about whether the U.S. will remain the world's leading economy, or whether it's entering the final chapter of its economic dominance. And if that sounds extreme, remember, world orders don't collapse overnight. They unravel slowly, until one day, they snap. We could be nearing that day. You don't have to dig deep to see what's going on. The signs are everywhere. The U.S. just crossed a line we've never seen before: $34 trillion in national debt. It has been coined as the most expensive debt burden in American history. And the most alarming part? That number is growing faster than the U.S. economy itself. It's not just about debt. It's about what comes with it. Rising interest costs, weakened global confidence, less money for everything else. At the same time, our grip on global power is starting to slip. The dollar, long the undisputed king of global trade, is now under threat. Fortune reports that BRICS nations, led by China, are accelerating efforts to ditch the dollar in global trade. This isn't theory anymore. It's happening in trade deals, energy contracts, and financial infrastructure. And while America argues, China builds. Their economy is picking up steam fast. GDP grew 5.4% last quarter. But it's not just growth. It's targeted growth. In areas that matter: AI, clean energy, chips, supply chains, long-term dominance, not short-term profit. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., the Federal Reserve is throwing out serious red flags. Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, didn't sugarcoat it. He told Congress flat out that America's debt path is unsustainable. All of this hits confidence, not just investor confidence, but global trust. The trust that America knows what it's doing, that its institutions are strong, that it leads with purpose. That's fading. And as that trust fades, other countries are making bold moves. Just last year, China signed a landmark oil deal with Saudi Arabia, denominated in yuan, not dollars. This might be the clearest shot yet at the heart of U.S. economic power, the petrodollar system. If energy no longer flows through the dollar, global demand for it drops, and with it, American leverage. Ray Dalio has been warning about this for years. The billionaire investor says we're in the late stage of a major debt cycle and heading toward a structural shift. Here's how he explained it.
This is the long-term debt peak. Debt burdens have simply become too big. For the United States, Europe, and much of the rest of the world, this happened in 2008. It happened for the same reason it happened in Japan in 1989 and in the United States back in 1929. Now the economy begins deleveraging. In a deleveraging, people cut spending, incomes fall, credit disappears, asset prices drop, banks get squeezed, the stock market crashes, social tensions rise, and the whole thing starts to feed on itself the other way. As incomes fall and debt repayments rise, borrowers get squeezed. No longer credit-worthy, credit dries up, and borrowers can no longer borrow enough money to make their debt repayments. Scrambling to fill this hole, borrowers are forced to sell assets. The rush to sell assets floods the market at the same time as spending falls. This is when the stock market collapses, the real estate market tanks, and banks get into trouble. As asset prices drop, the value of the collateral borrowers can put up drops. This makes borrowers even less creditworthy. People feel poor. Credit rapidly disappears. Less spending, less income, less wealth, less credit, less borrowing, and so on. It's a vicious cycle. This appears similar to a recession, but the difference here is that interest rates can't be lowered to save the day. In a recession, lowering interest rates works to stimulate borrowing. However, in a deleveraging, lowering interest rates doesn't work because interest rates are already low and soon hit 0%. So the stimulation ends.
One that doesn't end with tweaks to interest rates. One that ends with a new world order. He's not alone. In August 2023, Fitch downgraded the U.S. credit rating, citing runaway debt and political dysfunction. That makes borrowing more expensive. That rattles global markets. That shakes the foundation of the so-called safest asset on Earth. And let's not forget perception. Globally, the narrative is changing. The Economist wrote that America can't afford political dysfunction because dysfunction is the threat now, not just to governance, but to leadership itself. When you add it all up, record debt, shrinking dollar dominance, political chaos, foreign economic expansion, and declining global trust, you get a long-term trend. One that points to a future where the U.S. is no longer calling the shots, and that future might already be here. So let's pause for a second, because I know it's a lot. Debt, China, currency shifts, political chaos, it all sounds overwhelming. But here's the simplest way to understand what's happening. The United States has been the world's economic leader for nearly a century. The dollar became the global standard. American companies dominated innovation. U.S. financial systems shaped global trade. But now, those pillars are starting to crack. Let's start with the dollar, because that's not just paper, it's power. When the world trades in dollars, the U.S. gains leverage. Sanctions work. Global banks comply. Interest rates set in Washington affect the global economy. It's the ultimate tool of soft power, but that's changing. Countries are cutting deals in local currencies, like the Chinese yuan or Indian rupee. China and Brazil have already agreed to ditch the dollar in bilateral trade. The U.S. isn't losing the dollar's dominance overnight, but it doesn't have to. All it takes is a shift in confidence, a change in direction. And that shift has already started. Now layer that with debt, currently sitting at over $34 trillion. That's more than the entire U.S. economy produces in a year, and the interest alone is projected to exceed $1 trillion annually. To put that in perspective, it's more than we spend on veterans, transportation, or education combined. Debt in itself isn't always bad, but when it grows faster than your income, that's when things break. Historically, these cycles end in one of three ways: devaluation, default, or massive inflation. None of those are painless. Now, here's the tricky part. While the U.S. is juggling all these internal problems, China is playing offense. China doesn't just want to grow, it wants to lead. It's investing heavily in AI, clean tech, chip manufacturing, electric vehicles. It already produces over 80% of the world's solar panels and leads in EV battery exports. It's rapidly building strategic control over future industries. And globally, the Belt and Road Initiative has now signed partnerships with over 140 countries. Ports in Africa, railways in Europe, data cables in the Middle East. It's not just about economic output anymore. It's about who sets the rules of the game, and China is building its own playbook. Meanwhile, the US is stuck in political gridlock. Whether it's raising the debt ceiling, funding infrastructure, or regulating tech, every issue becomes a battle. And while politicians argue, other countries move forward. Think of it like this. You're in a race, and instead of running, your team is arguing about which direction to go. Meanwhile, your opponent is already halfway around the track. That dysfunction hurts confidence, both at home and abroad. Foreign leaders, investors, and institutions start asking, can America still lead? And that's where the bigger issue comes in, global trust. After World War II, the US became the backbone of a new world order. The United Nations, the World Bank, NATO, the dollar, free markets. But that system is fraying. More countries are exploring alternatives. Alliances are shifting. Conflicts are rising. Russia's war in Ukraine, China's posture toward Taiwan, instability in the Middle East. These flashpoints are testing the US's ability to respond with strength and unity. And the truth is, global leadership requires stability at home. Without it, even the strongest foundations can weaken. So what does this all mean? It means the US is at a crossroads, not a collapse, but a turning point. We're moving from a world where America calls the shots to a world where power is shared, negotiated, and constantly shifting. What used to be guaranteed, like the dominance of the dollar or the strength of the US credit rating, is now up for debate. It also means we need to change how we think. Because the old playbook, print money, borrow more, lead by default, isn't going to work forever. This new era is going to be defined by strategic economic planning, long-term investment in innovation, repairing internal dysfunction, rebuilding global alliances, and earning back trust. For individuals, that means paying attention to more than just stock prices or GDP numbers. So here's the big question. Where does all this lead? If the current trends continue, ballooning debt, weakening dollar dominance, political instability, and China's strategic rise, we're looking at several realistic outcomes. None of them are catastrophic in isolation, but together, they mark the end of an era. Let's break down the most likely paths ahead. Scenario 1. China becomes the world's largest economy by 2030. This one's already in motion. China's economy is growing at nearly twice the pace of the US in real terms, and it's not just quantity, it's quality. China's economic growth is increasingly driven by high-tech sectors, domestic consumption, and global exports. The IMF and Goldman Sachs both project that China could surpass the US in GDP by the early 2030s. That would be more than symbolic. It would shift global economic gravity eastward. Scenario 2. The dollar's global role shrinks. The dollar isn't disappearing, but its dominance is slipping. Its share of global reserves is down to around 58%, a 25-year low. Meanwhile, countries are signing deals in yuan, euro, and even gold. The World Gold Council reports that central banks bought more gold than in any year since 1950. Why? Diversification, security, a hedge against a weaker dollar system. As the world moves toward a multipolar currency system, the US loses some of the unique advantages it's long enjoyed, like cheaper borrowing and influence over global markets. Scenario 3. A confidence crisis sparks a market shock. We've already seen it once. In 2011, the US faced a credit downgrade from Standard & Poor's after a brutal debt ceiling standoff. Markets tanked, confidence slipped. Only a couple of years back, it happened again. Fitch downgraded the US, citing debt growth and governance concerns, though not at the same level as 2011. But if this becomes a pattern, if investors start questioning US solvency or leadership, then the fallout could hit everything from interest rates and bond yields to mortgage payments and tech valuations. Scenario 4. Internal division prevents global leadership. America's greatest challenge may not be external competition, but internal dysfunction. If political gridlock continues to paralyze action, confidence will erode even further. It's not just about passing budgets. It's about solving real issues: infrastructure, innovation, healthcare, energy independence. Without unity and long-term thinking, even the best plans won't matter. And globally, perception matters. Allies need to trust that the U.S. can lead with stability. Rivals need to believe it can act decisively. If that trust vanishes, so does leadership. Scenario 5. The U.S. reinvents itself and leads the transition. This is the hopeful path, and it's still possible. America has always thrived when it embraces change. If the U.S. reforms its fiscal habits, invests in next-generation industries, renews global partnerships, and reclaims bipartisan functionality, it could lead the next chapter of the global economy. It won't be easy, but it's been done before. From the Great Depression to World War II to the tech revolution, the U.S. has always found a way to adapt. The bottom line is, world orders don't vanish in a flash. They fade, fragment, and evolve. And in that space of uncertainty, new leaders emerge. Right now, we're in that space, and the choices made today by policymakers, business leaders, and even regular citizens will shape how the next decade unfolds. An alternate theory is that this could very well be a planned crash, and Trump might be forcing the Fed to lower interest rates and global economies to accept U.S. dominance. But is that really the case? Click the video on screen to find out.